David had always loved peaceful evenings. After retiring from his job at a printing company, he moved into a quiet suburban neighborhood. The houses were lined neatly, with trimmed hedges, small lawns, and patios where people sometimes sat outside in the evenings. David had chosen this place because he thought it would be the perfect spot for a calm and comfortable life. That summer, though, was different from the others. The heat was stronger than usual. Every afternoon, the sun felt like it was pressing down, and even after sunset, the air stayed heavy and warm. David enjoyed sitting on his back patio with a book or a glass of iced tea, but lately it had become uncomfortable. He had tried just sitting still, but the heat wrapped around him, like a thick blanket. One afternoon, he decided to take action. He went into his garage where he kept old household items and tools. In one corner, behind a box of winter coats, he found an outdoor oscillating fan he had bought years ago. It wasn't new or fancy, but it worked well. The fan was about as tall as his waist, with a wide circular head and a base that kept it steady. It made a soft, steady hum when turned on, the kind of sound that faded into the background after a few minutes. That evening, he placed the fan on the patio, facing the chair where he liked to sit. When he switched it on, a refreshing breeze moved across his face and arms. For the first time in weeks, he could sit outside without sweating after 5 minutes. The sound of the fan was gentle, no louder than the air conditioning units that hummed behind many of the houses in the neighborhood. David smiled to himself, opened his book, and finally relaxed. The first few nights were wonderful. He read until the sky turned orange and the crickets began to sing. Sometimes he'd sip iced tea or watch the soft glow of porch lights flicker on around the neighborhood. His fan kept him cool and comfortable, and life felt simple again. But in the house next door, someone else was paying close attention. Sandra, his neighbor, had a reputation in the community. She was on the HOA board and treated her position with a seriousness that sometimes felt more like a mission. She believed every tiny rule should be followed exactly, whether it was about lawn height, paint colors, or the number of plants in a flower bed. Neighbors had quietly nicknamed her Karen, though never to her face. She was the kind of person who noticed everything. From her back window, Sandra had a clear view of David's patio. The first night she saw the fan, she frowned but said nothing. The second night, she stood on her porch for a moment, tilting her head as if listening for something. By the third night, she was convinced that the fan was a problem. She decided. The sound was unpleasant and disruptive. David had no idea she was watching. He continued enjoying his evenings, sometimes staying outside past 10. One morning, he stepped out to collect his mail and saw Sandra across the street, talking to another neighbor. She glanced at him quickly but didn't wave. That was normal. Enough. Sandra wasn't known for friendly greetings, so he thought nothing of it. 2 days later, just as David was pouring himself a cup of coffee in the kitchen, there was a sharp knock at the door. When he opened it, Sandra stood there. Holding a clipboard, her expression was firm, almost like a teacher ready to give a lecture. "Good morning, David," she said, in a tone that didn't sound very cheerful. "I need to speak with you about something important." David stepped aside, unsure what this was about. "Sure, what's going on?" "It's your fan," she said, "the outdoor one on your patio. It's very noisy, and it's disturbing the peace of the neighborhood. It might even be in violation of HOA noise rules." David blinked. "My fan? It's just a regular oscillating fan, Sandra. It's not that loud." Sandra shook her head as if she had already heard that excuse before. "I've been hearing it every evening. It's not just me. Other residents could be bothered as well. We value quiet evenings in this community, and I'm asking you to remove it." David felt a little amused, but kept his voice calm. "I understand your concern, but the fan is well within legal noise limits. I actually checked the manufacturer's manual, It's only about 50 decibels, which is quieter than most air conditioners. Sandra didn't seem impressed. Even so, it's an unnecessary disturbance. I'm giving you a chance to address it before I have to take it further. Her words, "take it further," hung in the air. David thought about it for a moment, then decided not to argue. "All right, I'll think about it," he said politely. Sandra gave a short nod and walked away, her clipboard tucked under her arm. That evening, David sat on his patio again, the fan spinning quietly. He thought about Sandra's complaint, but decided it wasn't fair to give up his comfort over something so minor. The air was still hot and heavy, and without the fan, he knew he'd be forced back indoors. Across the fence, a faint shadow moved in Sandra's yard. She stood there for a moment, watching, before going back inside. David noticed, but said nothing. The next few nights passed without any direct confrontation. But Sandra was not letting the matter go. She began recording short videos of the fan from her porch, standing at different angles trying to capture the sound on her phone. She emailed these clips to the HOA board with subject lines like urgent noise complaint and ongoing disruption after 9 p.m. In the videos, the faint hum of the fan was barely noticeable, sometimes drowned out by the chirping of crickets. Still, Sandra wrote long descriptions about how it was affecting the quality of life in the neighborhood. David had no idea this was happening. He was enjoying the warm summer nights, thinking the matter was over. But Sandra was only just beginning her campaign. She believed rules were rules, and in her mind, even a quiet fan was a threat to the peace she imagined the neighborhood should have. What David didn't realize yet was that her next move would be far more dramatic, and it would pull more than just the HOA into the situation. It would soon involve flashing lights, unexpected visitors, and a surprising turn that would leave the entire street talking for weeks. The morning after Sandra's visit, David went about his day as usual. He watered his small vegetable garden, checked the mailbox, and later in the afternoon drove to the local market to pick up groceries. The fan incident was already fading from his mind. He figured it had been just another one of Sandra's bursts of strictness. Maybe she was having a bad day, he thought, and decided not to take it personally. But while David was busy living his day, Sandra was working on a plan. In her mind, the fan wasn't just a small issue. It was an example of what could happen if neighbors started bending the rules. She believed that letting small things slide would lead to bigger problems. To her, the fan was a test of the HOA's authority, and she was determined to win. That afternoon, David was sitting at his kitchen table reading the newspaper when his phone buzzed with a message from an old neighbor 2 streets over. "Hey, just saw a long post in the HOA group about some kind of noise disturbance. Is that about you?" David frowned, set the paper down, and opened his phone. Sure enough, in the private HOA community group, there was a post from Sandra. She hadn't mentioned his name directly, but she described a loud outdoor fan being used nightly, claiming it was disturbing residents and possibly breaking HOA noise policies. She ended her post with a call for responsible neighbors to follow the rules for the sake of community peace. The comments were mixed. A few people agreed, saying they valued quiet evenings. But more people seemed confused, asking, "What? Fan?" Or, "I live on that street and haven't heard anything unusual." One neighbor even joked, "If it's as bad as you say, maybe I need one for my yard." David sighed. He didn't like being the subject of public complaint, even if most people didn't seem to care. Still, he decided not to engage in the online debate. In his experience, these things usually died down if you ignored them. A couple of days later, on a bright Wednesday morning, David was sweeping his front porch when he saw Sandra walking briskly down the sidewalk toward his house. She had a small video camera in one hand and a folded piece of paper in the other. "David?" she called out before she even reached the steps. I'm here to follow up on the noise problem. David leaned on his broom, keeping his tone even. Morning, Sandra. The fan's still there, yes. I haven't made any changes because it's not breaking any rules. Sandra lifted the folded paper like it was proof. I've been documenting the disturbance. Here are my notes from the past week, times, dates, and the noise levels I believe it's producing. I've also recorded videos from my property. David looked at her calmly. Have you measured the noise with a proper meter? I don't need a meter to know it's disruptive, she replied firmly. I've lived here for 12 years and I know what's acceptable. David shook his head with a slight smile. Sandra, I understand you care about the neighborhood, but my fan is quieter than a lawnmower, quieter than an AC unit, and I've seen people run those all night. That's not the point, she said. If one person bends the rules, others will think they can too. Or maybe, David said gently, neighbors can just respect each other's comfort unless it's truly a problem. Sandra pursed, her lips clearly not satisfied. If you won't fix it yourself, I'll have to take it further. David didn't answer that. He simply nodded once and went back to sweeping, letting her walk away without another word. Over the next few days, David noticed Sandra outside more often. Sometimes she was on her porch, holding her phone as if she were recording. Other times, she'd be at the far end of her yard, staring toward his patio. She seemed to be collecting evidence, though David still couldn't understand what exactly she hoped to prove. Then one evening, as David was enjoying a light breeze from the fan, he saw a flicker of movement out of the corner of his eye. Sandra was leaning slightly over the fence, pointing her phone in his direction. It wasn't the first time, but this time she seemed to be narrating into it, likely describing what she saw. David didn't say anything. Confronting her would only escalate things. But he knew she was building some kind of case. That weekend, he found out just how far she had taken it. At the monthly HOA board meeting, Sandra brought the issue up formally. David hadn't planned to attend, but another neighbor who did was quick to fill him in afterward. According to his neighbor, Sandra stood up during the community concerns portion of the meeting and presented her recordings to the board. She described the fan as a persistent source of disruptive noise and a growing issue for multiple households. She also suggested the board consider creating a new rule banning all outdoor fans in the neighborhood. One board member, curious, asked if anyone else had complained about it. Sandra hesitated before admitting she was the only one who had filed an official complaint. Another board member asked if she had measured the actual noise levels, and she said she hadn't used any professional equipment. At that point, a different neighbor, one who lived directly across from David, spoke up. I sit outside every night and I can barely hear it. Honestly, I hear the crickets more than that fan. I don't think it's bothering anyone except maybe you. The room had apparently gone quiet after that. Even though Sandra continued to push, the board didn't make any immediate decisions. Instead, they said they would look into it and asked her to gather proper measurements if she wanted to pursue it further. When David heard all this later that night, he couldn't help but chuckle. He still didn't think it would go beyond a petty HOA dispute. He figured Sandra might give up now that the board wasn't fully supporting her, but he was wrong. Sandra didn't see the board's hesitation as a sign to stop. She saw it as a challenge. If the HOA wouldn't act quickly enough, she would find another way to prove her point. And that other way would be far more serious than any HOA letter or neighborhood meeting. Sandra began spending more time indoors near her back window at night, with the curtains slightly parted. Whenever David switched on his fan, she took note of the time. If he stayed outside past 9 o'clock, she wrote it down. If she thought the fan was louder than usual, she recorded a clip. One night, while sitting at her kitchen table with her laptop open, she began typing something different. This wasn't another email to the HOA board. This time, she was preparing to make a phone call, not to a neighbor, not to a friend, but to a place that could take official action. David, meanwhile, had no idea what was coming. As far as he knew, the worst of it was over. He continued with his normal routine, enjoying the summer nights with his fan humming softly beside him. He had no clue that the situation was about to change completely, and that Sandra's next move would bring unexpected people and flashing lights right to his driveway. The day had been warm and still. By the time evening came, the sky glowed with soft shades of orange and pink. David sat on his patio with a cold glass of iced tea, his book resting open in his lap. The fan was on, moving back and forth, sending a gentle breeze across his face. He sighed contentedly, thinking about how this was exactly the kind of retirement evening he had imagined when he bought this house. The neighborhood was quiet, except for the distant sound of children laughing down the street and the soft hum of air conditioners. A couple of houses away, someone was grilling and the smell of burgers drifted through the air. David was so relaxed that he didn't notice the faint sound of a car approaching until it turned the corner. It wasn't just any car. Moments later, he saw flashing red and blue lights reflect against the windows of his house. At first, he thought there must have been an accident nearby, but the lights grew brighter and then stopped right in front of his driveway. David blinked in surprise. Two police officers stepped out of the car. They weren't rushing or looking tense. They walked calmly but with purpose toward his front door. He set down his glass and walked around from the patio to the driveway to meet them. "Good evening, officers," he said, trying to keep his voice even. "Is everything all right?" One of the officers, a tall man with kind eyes, gave a polite nod. "Good evening, sir. We received a noise complaint about a loud piece of equipment operating in your backyard. We just need to check it out." David raised his eyebrows. "A loud piece of equipment? You mean the fan?" The second officer, a shorter woman with a clipboard, glanced at her notes. "Yes, the caller described it as a large industrial fan producing disturbing noise and said it was on every night." David let out a short laugh, more from disbelief than amusement. "Well, you're welcome to take a look. I promise it's nothing close to industrial." He led them around the side of the house to the patio. The fan stood there, spinning quietly. The officer with the clipboard tilted her head, listening. After a moment, she gave a slight smile. This is what the complaint was about?" David nodded. "Apparently so." The taller officer pulled a small decibel meter from his pocket, a tool for measuring noise levels. He switched it on, held it near the fan, and watched the numbers on the screen. 52 decibels, he said. "That's quieter than most refrigerators." "Well, within legal limits." The shorter officer wrote something on her clipboard. "Sir, you're not breaking any laws or regulations here. This is just a regular household appliance." David spread his hands. "I could have told you that." The taller officer gave a small chuckle, then turned serious again. "We still have to respond to every 911 call we get. But I will say, this kind of thing isn't exactly what emergency lines are for." David thought about who could have made the call. He didn't have to think long. "Was the caller perhaps my neighbor, Sandra?" he asked cautiously. The officers exchanged a brief glance, but didn't answer directly. "We can't share the name of the caller, sir," the woman said politely, but David could see the answer in their expressions. They asked a few more routine questions, like what time he usually turned the fan off, and then assured him that he was fine to continue using it. Before leaving, the taller officer added, "Just so you know, making repeated non-emergency calls to 911 can lead to consequences. Hopefully, this doesn't happen again." David thanked them and watched as they walked back to their car. As they drove away, the flashing lights faded down the street. The whole thing had lasted maybe 15 minutes, but it left him shaking his head. He returned to his patio and sat back down, though his book now lay forgotten. The evening didn't feel as peaceful as before. The idea that someone had actually called 911 over a simple fan was almost unbelievable to him. Across the fence, the blinds in Sandra's window were slightly open. David was sure she was watching. When their eyes almost met, the blinds closed quickly. The next morning, word had already begun to spread. Neighbors who had seen the police car the night before were curious. A few stopped by while David was tending to his garden, asking if everything was okay. It was nothing serious, David explained with a small smile. Just a noise complaint about my patio fan. The police confirmed it's fine. Some neighbors laughed in disbelief. One said, "I didn't even know you had a fan out there until now." Another shook his head and muttered, "Some people need better hobbies." That evening, David noticed something interesting. While he sat outside reading, two of his neighbors across the street brought out their own outdoor fans, small table models they set on their porches. One of them caught his eye and gave him a wink. David couldn't help but smile. It seemed he had silent allies. Still, he knew Sandra wouldn't see this as the end of it. She had already tried the HOA, and now she had tried the police. She wasn't the type to simply let something go when she believed she was right. Inside her home, Sandra was pacing in her living room. She didn't feel victorious after the police visit. Quite the opposite. She thought they hadn't taken her complaint seriously enough. To her, the fact that they left without issuing a warning to David was proof that she needed to push harder. She opened her laptop and began typing an email, this time addressed to both the HOA board and the local police department's non-emergency line. She described the incident, insisting that while the fan might not break current noise laws, it was still affecting the comfort and health of residents. She urged them to reconsider their standards for noise. Meanwhile, David decided he had to prepare himself. If Sandra was willing to call 911 over something so minor, he didn't know what her next step might be. He started keeping his own notes, dates and times he used the fan, and even a video recording showing how quiet it was from the street. He didn't want trouble, but he also wasn't going to let false claims paint him as a disruptive neighbor. For now, though, he planned to keep enjoying his summer evenings. The fan stayed on, its soft hum blending with the night sounds. But he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only a pause in the conflict, not the end. What he didn't know was that the next stage wouldn't just be about rules or complaints. It would be, the following week, the HOA announced a special meeting to discuss neighborhood complaints and regulations. David had received the notice a few days earlier. At first, he debated whether to go. He didn't want to create more tension, but something inside him told him this was the moment he couldn't sit back. He needed to defend himself, not just for the fan, but for fairness. The evening of the meeting, the small community hall was filled with familiar faces. Most neighbors had come out of curiosity, while a few were clearly supporters of Sandra, sitting stiffly in their chairs with arms crossed. The air smelled faintly of coffee and cleaning supplies, mixed with the nervous energy of people waiting to speak. David entered quietly, trying to remain calm. Sandra was already there, seated near the front, her laptop open on the table in front of her. She looked ready, prepared to present her argument in detail. The board members took their seats at the head of the room. Papers were shuffled, chairs creaked, and murmurs floated around the room. The meeting began with the usual introductions, and then the board chair called for community concerns. Sandra stood first. She spoke clearly and confidently. "I am here to address a recurring disturbance in our neighborhood," she said. "A loud outdoor fan has been operating nightly in one resident's backyard, causing discomfort for nearby households." Some neighbors exchanged confused glances. One whispered, "It's just a fan." Sandra continued, showing her recordings on her laptop. She played short clips of the fan in motion. "Even though it may seem small, the repeated noise affects our peace and quality of life. I urge the board to enforce stricter noise regulations." David waited quietly, taking in the room. When Sandra finished, she sat down with a satisfied expression, clearly expecting agreement. But then, something shifted. The board chair, a middle-aged woman with a calm demeanor, spoke first. "Thank you for your presentation, Sandra. While we appreciate your concern, we must consider the facts. Do we have complaints from other residents?" Sandra hesitated. "Not yet," she admitted, "but it is a matter of principle." The chair nodded and looked toward David. "Sir, would you like to respond?" David stood slowly, his heart beating faster than he expected. He took a deep breath. "Yes, thank you. I want to explain what's happening because I feel there's been a misunderstanding." He gestured toward his patio. "I enjoy spending my evenings outside, just like many of you. The fan is a small one, meant to keep me cool during the summer. I understand everyone wants peace, and I would never intentionally disturb anyone." He paused, making eye contact with several neighbors. "Sandra has suggested that my fan is loud enough to be a serious problem, but the truth is, it's quieter than an air conditioner, quieter than a refrigerator, and certainly quieter than most lawn equipment we all use. I've also documented the times I use it, and I've measured the sound levels. The police even visited recently and confirmed that it is within legal limits." Murmurs rippled through the room. Some neighbors nodded in agreement, while others whispered quietly. David continued, his voice steady. "I believe in community rules, and I respect the HOA, but I also believe in fairness. A complaint like this, without evidence of real disturbance, shouldn't force someone to change their daily life. Our neighborhood is meant to be a place where people can live comfortably, and that includes everyone, not just those who notice or worry about minor things." Sandra frowned but remained silent. David sensed the attention shifting in his favor. Even the board members were nodding subtly, impressed by the clarity of his argument. A neighbor sitting near the back raised a hand. "I live directly across from David. I hear him using the fan sometimes, and honestly, it's barely noticeable. I've never found it disruptive. I think it's fine." Another neighbor added, "I walk by there in the evenings, and I've never thought it was a problem. It's just a normal fan." Sandra's confident expression faltered slightly. The board chair leaned forward. "Sandra, it seems the majority of residents who actually experience the noise do not find it disturbing. The board must consider both complaints and facts when deciding on enforcement." Sandra opened her mouth but paused. It was clear she hadn't expected this level of opposition. She tried to gather her notes again, but the energy in the room had shifted. David felt a sense of relief, but didn't relax completely. He knew Sandra could still push harder, but for now the facts were on his side. The chair continued. "Based on the information we have, the measurements, the police visit, and the statements from neighbors, the board finds no violation of current HOA regulations. The fan may remain as it is." Some neighbors clapped quietly. David smiled and nodded, feeling validated. He had stood up calmly and presented his case clearly, and the community had listened. Sandra gathered her papers quickly. She looked frustrated, but polite. I still think the rules should be stricter," she said softly, but her voice lacked the force it had earlier. The board chair gave her a reassuring nod. "We appreciate your concern, Sandra. The board will consider it during future reviews, but for now we must follow our existing regulations." The meeting moved on to other topics, and David stayed until the end. As people filtered out, several neighbors approached him, thanking him for speaking up. Some said they felt embarrassed that Sandra's complaints had escalated to such a level. Others joked about how much fuss there had been over a simple fan. Outside, the evening was calm again. The sky was deepening into shades of purple, and the first stars appeared. David walked to his patio and turned on the fan, letting the gentle hum fill the air once more. For the first time in weeks, he felt truly at peace. Yet, he knew this wasn't just about the fan anymore. He realized that living in a community meant balancing personal freedom with collective expectations. Sometimes neighbors didn't see eye to eye, and conflicts arose even from minor issues. He had learned that handling them with patience, respect, and calm explanation often worked better than confrontation. A few days later, David received a note slipped under his door. It was from Sandra, handwritten on a neat piece of stationery. It read, "I am disappointed in the outcome, but will continue to monitor the neighborhood. Please be considerate in the future." David chuckled quietly to himself. He didn't feel threatened. He understood her perspective, even if he disagreed. He folded the note and placed it on the kitchen counter. The important thing was that he had defended his right to enjoy his home responsibly. That weekend, David invited a few neighbors over for a small evening tea. They sat on his patio, laughing, sharing stories, and enjoying the cool breeze from the fan. The sense of community felt stronger than ever. Even those who had been neutral in the meeting came to appreciate David's calm approach. As they chatted, David reflected on the situation. Sandra had been persistent, but her actions had inadvertently brought the neighborhood closer. People were talking more, sharing experiences, and even helping each other with small tasks around their homes. The conflict had created a moment for neighbors to connect and understand each other better. David realized that while some people might be strict or critical, handling disputes with honesty and clarity often changed outcomes for the better. By staying calm and respectful, he had not only protected his right to enjoy his property, but also strengthened his place in the community. By the end of the evening, David felt a sense of accomplishment. The fan continued to spin quietly beside him, a small but significant symbol of balance and understanding in a world where not everyone saw eye to eye. For once, he felt confident that future disputes could be handled with the same calm and logic, no shouting, no complaints, just communication and respect. And while Sandra might continue to watch from her porch, David knew that he had won more than just the right to use a fan. He had shown that fairness, patience, and the courage to speak up could make a difference in any community. The stars shone brightly overhead as the last of his neighbors waved goodbye. David switched off the fan, enjoying the gentle stillness of the night. Peace had returned to his home, not because conflict disappeared, but because it had been met with reason, patience, and understanding. The weeks that followed the HOA meeting were surprisingly calm. David's patio fan hummed quietly every evening, blending into the background of the neighborhood's soft summer sounds. For the first time in a long while, he felt he could enjoy his backyard without fear or tension. Yet, he remained aware that living in a community meant constant interaction and occasional misunderstandings. One Saturday morning, David decided to take a walk through the neighborhood. He wanted to stretch his legs and greet the neighbors properly after the recent tensions. The sun shone warmly, birds sang, and the scent of fresh grass filled the air. Many homeowners were out, tending to their lawns or doing weekend chores. Some waved at him, smiling. Others nodded, a small sign of recognition. Sandra was outside as well, trimming her bushes along the front of her house. David approached cautiously, wanting to maintain civility. "Good morning, Sandra," he called politely. She looked up, her expression unreadable at first. Then she nodded curtly. "Good morning, David," she said. There was a moment of silence. Then David decided to break it with a friendly gesture. "The weather is perfect for working outside, isn't it?" he said. Sandra glanced at the sun and gave a short nod. "Yes, it's pleasant," she replied. David noticed a small box beside her gardening supplies, and curiosity got the better of him. "Is that a new planter?" he asked. Sandra looked at the box, then back at David. "Yes, I'm trying some new flowers. Thought it might brighten the yard," she said. There was a softness in her voice now, something different from before. Less rigid, less confrontational. David smiled. "That's a good idea. I like flowers too. My wife planted some along the patio last year. They really make the space cheerful." Sandra paused, then nodded slightly. I see. That's nice. The encounter was brief, but David felt something shift. It wasn't a friendship, not yet, but it was the beginning of mutual respect. They both knew that living in a neighborhood meant sharing space and understanding boundaries. Later that day, a small crowd had gathered near the community park. A few neighbors had brought chairs and coolers, chatting over coffee and lemonade. David had been invited, and he arrived with, "A plate of fresh cookies! David!" someone called. "Over here!" He waved and walked over, greeting everyone with a smile. Conversations flowed easily about gardening, recipes, weekend plans, and even the minor drama over the fan. Some laughed, joking about the great fan debate, while others shared how the situation had encouraged them to speak up in a calm and respectful way when conflicts arose. Sandra appeared later, walking carefully along the edge of the gathering. David noticed her but didn't approach immediately. She carried a small tray of cupcakes, and she quietly set them on the table. A few neighbors looked surprised but welcomed her contribution. It was a small gesture, yet it spoke volumes. The atmosphere at the park felt different now, lighter, friendlier, and more inclusive. People were beginning to understand that disagreements didn't have to divide the community. They could encourage dialogue and connection. David found a seat beside an older couple, and they began talking about their gardens. "It's amazing how one small misunderstanding can grow into something bigger," the woman said. David nodded. "Yes, but if people approach issues with honesty and respect, it can lead to understanding instead of conflict." Across the table, Sandra was quietly helping another neighbor organize the snacks. David realized that even someone who seemed strict and inflexible could change. Actions, no matter how small, often reflected a willingness to adapt and cooperate. That evening, David returned home and went to his patio. He switched on the fan, letting its soft hum fill the space. He thought about the past weeks. The call to 911, the meeting, the awkward confrontations, and finally, the small victories of understanding and calm communication. His neighborly walk and the park gathering had reminded him that even minor conflicts could be transformed into lessons about patience, listening, and compromise. He reflected on how his approach, staying calm, respectful, and well-prepared, had helped turn a potentially stressful situation into an opportunity for connection. Just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold, David noticed a small movement near the fence. It was Sandra tending to her flowers. She looked up and waved briefly. David waved back, a simple gesture that signified a truce, an acknowledgement that they could coexist peacefully in the neighborhood. The days continued, and gradually the story of the great fan dispute became a light-hearted memory rather than a point of tension. Neighbors began to share small jokes about it at community events, but there was no malice, only amusement at how seriously such a simple issue had been taken. David realized something important. Living in a community meant balancing individual needs with collective expectations. Conflicts were inevitable, but the way they were handled could change everything. By standing up respectfully, presenting facts, and keeping communication calm, misunderstandings could become opportunities for building trust and understanding. Sandra, too, seemed to have learned something. While she might still be attentive to neighborhood noise, she had begun to see that accusations and formal complaints weren't always the answer. Cooperation and observation often worked better than confrontation. One afternoon, David received an unexpected note from the HOA. It was a short letter commending residents for their conduct during the fan incident and noting how the resolution had encouraged more open dialogue within the community. The board thanked everyone for maintaining civility and fostering neighborly respect. David folded the letter with a smile. He felt proud, not of winning a complaint, but of contributing to a more thoughtful, understanding neighborhood. It was a victory for patience, clarity, and respect over conflict and tension. Weeks later, David's family came to visit. His grandchildren ran around the yard, chasing each other while the fan provided a gentle breeze. Sandra's children were there too, playing nearby. The atmosphere was warm, friendly, and relaxed. What had once been a source of tension now felt like a normal, happy part of neighborhood life. David watched the children play, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. The entire ordeal, from the initial 911 call to the HOA meeting and beyond, had been a learning experience. He had learned about patience, preparedness, and the importance of respectful communication. The neighbors had learned that minor conflicts didn't have to escalate, and even someone initially rigid could adapt when approached with calmness and clarity. That evening, as David sat on the patio, the fan spinning quietly beside him, he reflected on the lessons of the past weeks. Life in a community could be complicated, full of different personalities and perspectives. But with understanding, patience, and honesty, even the smallest conflicts could be resolved peacefully. The stars appeared overhead, twinkling softly against the night sky. David felt a sense of calm fulfillment. His home was peaceful, his family happy, and his neighborhood stronger because of the experience. What had started as a simple disagreement over a noisy fan had grown into a story of respect, communication, and community growth. He realized that the true value of living in a neighborhood wasn't just in shared spaces, but in shared understanding and cooperation. Conflicts were inevitable, but they could lead to connection if handled with patience and thoughtfulness. As the night deepened, the fan continued its gentle hum. David leaned back, sipping his iced tea, and smiled. The neighborhood had changed, not because rules had been rewritten, but because people had learned to listen, to speak respectfully, and to find common ground. In that moment, David felt a sense of quiet victory. The fan, once a symbol of conflict, was now a symbol of harmony. It reminded him that small acts of patience and communication could transform misunderstandings into lasting community bonds. And as the breeze carried the faint scent of flowers across his backyard, David realized something simple yet profound. Sometimes, the smallest challenges could teach the greatest lessons.